Kimball once said, U.S. Secretary of the Navy Kimball once said, Jian Suisun alone is worth 5 U.S. divisions. This is the greatest recognition and praise for Jian Suisun. At that time, Jian Suisun was the only person in the world who could make the Americans suppress and slander with all their strength. Jian Suisun in his youth. On April 23, 1949, millions of lions crossed the Yangtze River and occupied the so-called Presidential Palace of the Republic of China government, completely declaring the liberation of Nanjing. This made Jian Suisun and other patriotic scientists intensify the upsurge of returning to China and building the motherland. However, Jian Suisun was slandered as a spy because he participated in the first-generation missile research of the United States and served as a consultant to several military research institutes. Country. In the history of the United States, he once called himself the defender of the law. He changed the law that he is proud of for one person, and it is the only time he has changed the law for an individual. He is our Mr. Jian Suisun, Mr. Jian. Since 1950, Jian Suisun was illegally detained by the United States and placed under house arrest for 5 years. Finally, with the full rescue of the motherland, Jian Suisun ended his darkest hour in the United States. On September 17, 1955, after experiencing many twists and turns, he finally returned to the motherland. On the eve of Jian Suisun's return to China, Dubrich asked him, China is an agricultural society now, and there is no way to provide enough space and soil to develop your genius abilities in missiles and aviation. What can you, an outstanding scientist, do? What? Jian Suisun replied to Dubrich in this way, that is my motherland. As long as I can go back, even if I am asked to grow apples, I am willing. Unexpectedly, on October 27, 1966, the Dongfeng 2A missile carried an atomic bomb from the Jiuquan Launch Center and accurately hit the target range after traveling more than 800 kilometers. In just 10 years, with the efforts of Jian Suisun and a group of scientific researchers, with the great victory of 2 bombs and 1 satellite, China has completely bid farewell to the threat of nuclear blackmail from the United States. After Jian Suisun got on the ship and returned to China, he disappeared from the stage of the world's top aviation field. No one knew where he went or what he was doing, as if he had completely evaporated in the world. Many years later, when Jian Suisun appeared in front of the people again, he fulfilled his original promise and indeed planted apples in China, but the apples he planted were with cores. In the 1950s and 1960s, the Kuomintang retreated to Taiwan, and there were still hundreds of thousands of enemy agents on the mainland. But for a super big name like Jian Suisun, not to mention in China, even in the United States or any country in the world, he is a sensational figure. But the enemy agents were stunned to find no trace of them on the land of China. This is not too bad for the enemy agents of the Kuomintang. On the contrary, the KMT spy agency is completely opposite to its army, very tolerant of loneliness and forbearance. Until more than 20 years after the founding of New China, there are still thousands of enemy agents who have not been exposed and are still sabotaging the country's construction. The key is that New China has activated the highest level of red confidentiality mechanism in order to protect scientific researchers, and for top physicists like Jian Suisun, the confidentiality mechanism is the top of the top. When Jian Suisun just returned to the motherland, General Chen Gen was in charge of receiving him. At a banquet, General Chen Gen asked Jian Suisun, "Can we make missiles?" Jian Suisun replied very sincerely, "General Chen, if the Americans can make missiles, we Chinese will definitely be able to make missiles. We are not stupid than Americans. Americans have one brain, and we have one brain. Whoever is worse can certainly make it." After hearing this, General Chen Gen said with great satisfaction, "What I want is your words." It is difficult for us now to appreciate the firm will to fight bloody for the motherland when General Chen Gen and Suisun talked. General Chen Gen may not fully understand Jian Suisun's reputation in the world of physics, especially his achievements in nuclear energy and aerodynamics, and Mr. Jian Suisun does not know how difficult the current dilemma of China's lack of materials is. When encountering obstacles in the research and development stage, Jian Suisun invited his good friend Guo Yonghuai, an expert in engineering mechanics, to join in the missile research. But at that time, scientists all over the world were resisting the creation of destructive nuclear weapons, and Guo Yonghuai was extremely reluctant to participate in this great project at first. But Jian Suisun once said, "If one day, the atomic bomb is dropped on the Chinese people, I will regret it." even if its existence will bring doubts and debates. But I think it is a preparation against aggression. There is a completely different concept between not having a sword in hand and not using it. It is in this way that with the determination to dedicate everything to the country, he stayed in the Northwest Desert for 10 years, sharpened his sword in 10 years, and created China's strongest great power weapon. After the hard work of Jian Suisun and other scientists, China successfully launched a long-range launch vehicle into the Pacific Ocean, which means that China has begun to be on an equal footing with the world's major powers. The long-range launch vehicle involved here is the atomic bomb led by Jian Suisun and the hydrogen bomb developed by Yu Min. Under the guidance of satellites, it can have long-range strike capabilities. Having atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs can only show that you have the ability to destroy the enemy, but if you can't deliver them to the mainland of the empire, no matter how killer it is, it's useless. But not equipped with lethal weapons, the enemy will not be afraid. At most it will be the same as we are paper. Only by combining atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, and satellites with long-range launch vehicle technology can we deliver weapons of mass destruction to enemy countries and make enemy countries afraid to despise us. And this also allowed China to officially restore the legal seat of the United Nations and the status of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council in 1971, although the African brothers went all out to help us obtain a normal seat in the United Nations. But the final shocking blow was the successful test launch of a long-range intercontinental missile. With a long-range intercontinental missile and a nuclear bomb, China has the ability to deliver an atomic bomb or even a hydrogen bomb to any country in the world in a short period of time. This method is very powerful and barbaric, but for European and American countries, this is the words they can understand. Since then, Europe, the United States and the former Soviet Union countries no longer dare to underestimate China. As long as China says no, the whole world had better weigh it. Otherwise, you will mess up the matter every minute and want to retaliate against us. Yes, then drag the earth to destroy it together. When the Chinese say this, European and American countries believe it unconditionally, because we can really do it. There was a saying circulating on the internet, if the US empire suspects that you have weapons of mass destruction, you'd better have them, otherwise Iraq and Syria will be the end. Looking back on Mr. Jian's life, he once said, "The person I feel the most guilty about is my wife Zhang Ying, who gave up my favorite singing career and accompanied me to this day." Jian Suisun's wife Zhang Ying, singer. But Zhang Ying comforted her husband and said, "In this land of China, there can be no singer like Zhang Ying, but there can be no scientist like Jian Suisun. I am willing to make sacrifices for this. This is not a pity, but it is a noble honor. Those who offend China will be punished even if they are far away, because we have 2 bombs and 1 star. If you dare to blackmail us with nuclear weapons, we will dare to." China once promised in Chinese on the International Atomic Energy Agreement, the principle of never being the first to use nuclear weapons, and not using or threatening to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear countries. The United States asked us to give an explanation in English, but China refused. Because we have the strength to say no to the American people, to say no to what the United States is powerless to demand. It was paid for by generations of ancestors with blood and tears. Mr. Yuan kept us from starving, and Mr. Jian kept us from being beaten. The country is unparalleled, and the land of China is fortunate to have given birth to 2 of the greatest scientists of the 20th century. One holds a sword and solves our hunger problem, while the other holds a sword high and defends the sovereignty and dignity of our country. Always cherish the memory of Yuan Lao and Jian Lao, and wish you well. Life should have qualities, such as philosophy, such as benevolence, such as justice, such as wisdom, such as loyalty, such as brotherhood, such as teaching. My son's journey to the West this time is not his long-cherished ambition. He returns when he is young and brilliant. Few words, admonishment. This is Jian Suisun's father Jian Junfu's entrustment to him before he went west to study. Jian Suisun lived up to expectations and made great achievements in the United States. He has profound attainments in aerodynamics, solid fuel science, missile science, and rocket science. After the founding of New China, Jian Suisun couldn't wait to serve the motherland. He resigned from all his posts, and asked for leave to return to China on the grounds that he would visit his father in his hometown. At that time, Admiral Kimball of the U.S. Navy heard that Jian Suisun was going to return to China, so he quickly called the Immigration Bureau and asked them to organize Jian Suisun to return to China at all costs, Jian Suisun must not be released back to China. He alone is worth 5 divisions. Soon the Immigration Bureau began to investigate Jian Suisun and rejected his application to return to China for various reasons. Soon after the Korean War broke out, the United States once again refused Jian Suisun to return to China on the grounds that Jian Suisun possessed a large number of American secrets, and even put him under house arrest. The US FBI accused Jian Suisun of being a radical communist and slandered him for violating the US export control law. In order to smooth Jian Suisun's will, they also put Jian Suisun in prison. In the prison guards were instructed by their superiors to make a lot of noise every 10 minutes and shine bright lights on Jian Suisun. Jian Suisun was tortured to the point of losing his speech. In the end, Jian Suisun's alumni at Caltech put pressure on the US side, and they spent a lot of money to release Jian Suisun on bail. After Jian Suisun was released from prison, the United States still sent people to watch him day and night, for fear that he would pass on some information to the country. Jian Suisun had no choice but to abandon his martial arts, gave up the subjects he studied in the United States, and turned to study engineering cybernetics, and soon achieved fruitful results. During this period, Jian Suisun was interrogated many times by the United States. When the US asked him which China he wanted to return to, Jian Suisun replied firmly, "There is only one China." The US asked again, "Are you loyal to the nationalist government or the communist government?" Jian Suisun replied, "I am only loyal to the 450 million Chinese people and the government that is beneficial to the people." The US pressed hard, "Now these people are divided into 2 parts. Are you loyal to the government of Taiwan or the government of Thailand?" Jian Suisun replied, "I have already answered this question." Afterwards, Jian Suisun wrote his appeal on a piece of cigarette paper, and several people handed it to Premier Zhou. After hearing the news, the domestic people immediately thought of a way to exchange Jian Suisun with the American pilots captured in the Korean War. Soon several pilots were released to Hong Kong, and the Chinese side also started negotiations with the US side in Geneva. At the beginning, the US side refused to acknowledge the detention of Chinese nationals. It was not until Wang Bingnan took out the cigarette paper and informed the US side that the pilot had been released that the US side was speechless and agreed to Jian Suisun's return to China. On September 17, 1955, the Jian Suisun family boarded the President Cleveland. After nearly 20 days of turbulence, Jian Suisun finally arrived in Hong Kong and once again set foot on the hometown he had been away for many years. Soon Jian Suisun devoted himself to his work. "He has made outstanding contributions to my country's solid fuel, rockets, satellites, missiles, and other major fields. He is one of my country's 2 bombs and 1 satellite." Jian Suisun's road back to China was extremely bumpy. He gave up his life of prosperity, wealth, and comfort, resolutely fought against those who prevented him from returning to China, and finally returned home successfully, leading New China to achieve a leap in science and technology. The spirit of Jian Suisun is worth learning. He is a great patriotic scientist. A capable minister who governs the world, but a traitor in troubled times. On December 30, 2006, when the death knell sounded again in the United States, the roar of planes was still lingering over Iraq. Countless Iraqis are staring into the distance with complicated hearts. They don't know where the future Iraq should go. They also don't know, where is their next meal. Today is Saddam Hussein's execution day. From the early morning of this day, Saddam endured insults, beatings, and scolding by the American soldiers for nearly 6 hours, but he was powerless to resist all of this. Because he is no longer the leader of Iraq, but a death row prisoner. He begged the soldiers to give him a cigarette, but he was ignored. When the gallows was ready, he only left 3 last words to the world. This was unwillingness in his heart, and it was like some unknown prophecy that was about to be fulfilled. Born in troubled times, struggling to survive. When the veil of the ancient civilization in the Middle East is lifted by weapons, the beauty and peace of those times are gone forever. When the dictator came to power, the common people were in dire straits and mourned everywhere. In order to survive, people sacrificed their dignity and blood. Saddam was born in such a country. Like most heroes in troubled times, Saddam's family was also very poor. When he was 6 years old, his father took advantage of the chaos and disappeared. And the mother is a weak woman. In order to survive, she married a wealthy man in her second marriage. This man beat Saddam hard at every turn, and when he got angry outside, he also got angry with his stepson. At that time, the little Saddam was often covered in paint. Such a harsh living environment made Saddam want to save himself. He sneaked out one morning, and walked for an unknown amount of time before arriving at his uncle's house. That year, Saddam was only 10 years old. Since Saddam's uncle was a very devout believer, he took in Saddam and began to support Saddam for decades. Perhaps, Saddam was doomed from childhood to the path of his life, that is to escape. When Saddam was 22 years old, he participated in the assassination of Qasem, the Iraqi dictator, and went into exile because of this. However, during this process, he was admitted to Cairo University and became a serious student. However, Saddam was not a peaceful and conservative person. He returned to Iraq 3 years later and became a very important figure in the Ba'ath party. After that, Saddam fought for decades with the Ba'ath party and the then Iraqi ruler. Finally, Saddam took office and Iraq ushered in its fifth leader. As the saying goes, there are 3 fires for a new official to take office, and Saddam's ambitions began as soon as he came to power. Perhaps because he was young and poor, he paid great attention to the lives of the poor, and his medical care and salary policies have benefited many ordinary people. Later, it also used the inherent advantages of oil to seek a period of prosperity and happiness for the people of Iraq. He also issued the Declaration of the Nation, the purpose of which is to hope that the countries in the Middle East will unite and form a huge energy. But before the release, he did not discuss with other countries, which caused many people to complain about him. Perhaps from this time on, Saddam, the young dragon slayer, has become a dragon. Under the power, crazy war. During Saddam's administration, he had a very good relationship with the Soviet Union, so the Soviet Union also provided him with a lot of weapons. With these weapons, he frantically launched the Iran-Iraq War. In 1980, Saddam took the lead in sending troops to Iran. From this moment, Saddam's war life kicked off. In the beginning, Iraq caught Iran by surprise, and Iraq took the opportunity to destroy many towns in Iran. Just when Saddam was proud of this, Iran launched a strong counterattack. In 1982, Iran counterattacked, causing heavy losses in Iraq. The people who lived happily by relying on oil resources were once again reduced to funeral objects of war. After that, in order to win the victory, Saddam began to carry out repeated wars and used all kinds of tricks. But he didn't take Iran down, and Iran didn't take him down. One after another, the war lasted for 7 years, and finally the United Nations came forward to mediate. In August 1978, the two sides ceased fire. However, this time the war did not stop Saddam. Soon after, he launched the Gulf War, and it was this war that brought Saddam to ruin. He relied on his first army team in the Middle East to attack Kuwait frantically. At this time, the Soviet Union was on the verge of disintegration and could no longer support him. So the United States jumped out at this time and strongly intervened in this war. At this time, Saddam could not turn his head back, and could only be defeated by the US military. He was finally arrested in December 2003 at the age of 69. The 3 last words came true. In another year, Saddam will enter his 70s, an age when he knows his destiny and enjoys the world. But Saddam finally buried himself because of greed and the situation. Before he died, the 3 last words he said may also be the elegy he wrote for Iraq after he left. In the first sentence, he said, "Iraq is worthless without me." How arrogant this sentence is, but how true it is. After the fall of Saddam Hussein, Iraq fell into chaos for a long time. Countless people took to the streets and surrounded the US Embassy, causing nearly 10,000 civilian casualties. The next thing to come to Iraq is poverty and disease. Today, the unemployment rate in Iraq has soared, and most people can't even find a simple subsistence job. When Saddam was in power, he lived and worked in peace and contentment, not to mention being rich. It seems that Saddam's first prediction has come true. Saddam's second sentence is that those who betray me will not end well. Speaking of it, the reason why the US military was able to capture Saddam so quickly was also because they successfully used money to capture Saddam's personal bodyguards. The bodyguard and Saddam were siblings, but while Saddam was hiding, he went shopping and was captured by the US military. The US military did not use violence against him, but paid a sky-high price of $35 million in exchange for Saddam's address. So Saddam was arrested, and Iraq lost this troubled hero. The bodyguards and some high-level figures who betrayed Saddam were also cast aside by the people and could not return to their hometown for life. And Saddam's third sentence turned out to involve us. He said, "Never make an enemy of China." Facts have proved that with the continuous development of history, Saddam's words were not wrong. Today, our economy is taking off, our military strength is rising, and the Chinese dragon has awakened from its deep sleep. Our rise is enough to prove Saddam Hussein's foresight, and what he said is true. In fact, looking back now, it is difficult for us to judge whether Saddam is good or bad for the Iraqi people. He has a crazy side, and a side that is sincere for the people. He is complicated, crazy, and manic. As for how he is, I will leave it to the people of Iraq to judge for themselves.